This Friday, my husband and I both had early morning meetings, so that naturally meant that we both got up late and started arguing for who got to use the bathroom first, like a couple of siblings. And while we were trying to get ready, our daughter was dragging her feet, getting ready herself, and packing her backpack. It was not the funnest of mornings. And it was the end of a long week. And I imagine it was the end of a long week for many of us. The end of a long election season and the beginning of an unknown future. All week, as we've been bombarded by leading up to the elections and after the elections, I kept mulling over the stories of these widows. And every time I just kept getting stuck. And so, of course, I turned to watching the news, and instead of turning to prayer or meditation or really anything else, I just doom scrolled on my social media. So don't follow my example. But as I finally was able to settle myself and sit and think more about these women, I wondered how it must have felt to be them. I imagined how abandoned they felt. Widows had no place in society, both in Elijah's time and Jesus' time, because for women, security only existed through their connection to family, whether it was through their family of origin before they were married or to their husband's family after marriage. These women had neither. In a culture where honor and family meant everything, even meant your own right standing before God, these women had nothing. They barely had enough oil and flour, only 2 little coins. I imagine they must have felt deeply abandoned and hopeless. Society, and it seemed even their faith tradition, was not built for them. While the world continued to turn and men of power in the temples continued to enjoy their places of privilege, these women were simply trying to live day by day survival. Most of us, I am guessing, to one degree or another, come from places of power and privilege. And on the one hand, we could not be further from these widows with their little bread and their 2 coins. And yet, on the other hand, I suspect no matter where we come from, we have all felt abandoned and hopeless at times in our lives. We may feel like the society that we live in and even our Christian faith keeps rolling on, keeps enjoying the privileges of power, while we are simply consumed with the tasks of our daily living, and that at times life does feel tenuous and out of our control. Like some days we are the widow, wondering, is this the last loaf of bread I'm going to bake? And so today, for those of us that might feel like the widows, that might feel abandoned and hopeless, I wonder how their stories might help us. The first widow, the one who got water for Elijah and then gave him some of her bread, for her, I think we learn both how to argue and push back and how to have faith. Sometimes we have the tendency to use our faith or trust in God as reasons to be passive or non-confrontational. But this woman both had faith in God, but also had the capability to push back against Elijah. Elijah asked to give from her little, and she said, "No, I can't. I don't have enough to give." And yet when Elijah told her to have faith in God, then she still listened to that faith. She still gave up her little. And when she did, a miracle happened. That little flour and oil was enough to feed herself, her son, and Elijah for a year. On my way to work this Friday, after jockeying for the bathroom with my husband and yelling at my daughter, I then, of course, got stuck in traffic. And beside me, there was a bumper sticker, and it read, "Be realistic, expect a miracle." As I've been thinking about these widows, I've been thinking about this bumper sticker too. I've been trying to fill in the gaps in it. Is it be realistic and yet at the same time still expect a miracle? Or is it to be realistic, we must expect a miracle? I think as people of faith, it is that second one. We have to operate from a fundamental stance that when we trust, miracles happen. But we must not conflate a miracle to magical. Elijah was not some magical prince that swept the widow away and they went and lived forever in a happy castle. Nope, they subsisted day in and day out with the little they had. And I imagine life was still hard, but they had connection and trust together. Our society, our own natural human fear, and our instinct for survival tells us to hoard, to not trust, to keep what little we have. But I know that we in our own personal lives and as a society have seen how this does not work. The more that we keep to ourselves, the more that we hoard up our wealth, our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But when we are brave and courageous, when we expect a miracle, when we open our hands and trust that we will be fed, our world gets bigger and bigger. Our connections get broader and deeper. Like this widow, we must not be passive, but brave in our faith. We can both argue and we can trust in God. Our second widow this morning, she came to the temple equally as poor and disenfranchised as the first, and she gave her small, minuscule coins. And on first glance, this reading seems to just emphasize the lesson of the first: give the little you have. But this reading isn't just about the widow. This reading in our gospel is more about the Sadducees, the men of power at that time. The gospel begins by condemning them because they reveled in their power, their appearance, the way they were greeted in the marketplace because of their wealth and status. Jesus uses this widow in the story to shame and condemn this type of lifestyle, this abuse of authority and the use of religion as a pretense for self-gratification. This woman, her faith, her trust, her willingness to give her little, shamed the people of power. Her simple action was a condemnation of their selfishness. Any year for us that includes a presidential election can make us feel very small and very powerless. Endless news coverage and campaign emails can lead us to believe that we live and die by who wins this seat in office. And while it is an important and powerful one, it is just one. And we must never believe that we are powerless because their power feels bigger than ours. As people of faith, especially people from the Catholic tradition, we hold so deeply that God not only calls us to live faithfully, but to act justly. We stand here not as powerless, but instead we are emboldened by our sisters and brothers who have courageously lived lives of faith and justice before us. I think of Dorothy Day and Oscar Romero and this nameless woman and her 2 coins. Because these people never had seats of power, never had places of honor, and yet they brought more freedom, more peace, filled more bellies and inspired thousands of young people to dedicate their lives to service. They had a power greater than any elected office because it was the power of God, the steadfast belief in and call to love their God and their neighbor. It is very easy to feel small in this world, to feel hopeless and powerless. And if you feel this way today, then please know you are in good company, and there is power in that company. Because God told us that blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the earth. And my friends, that's us. That's Dorothy Day, that's Oscar Romero, that's the woman with her little oil and 2 coins. Because to be poor in spirit does not mean that you lack faith. It's the exact opposite. To be poor in spirit knows that you cannot do this alone. Your skills, your wealth, your power, they are so tiny, so little. But in recognizing that, you know that your connection to others, joining together your faith and belief to act like a widow that is willing to die to God's promise, that is where our strength comes from, and that is how our poor spirits will inherit the earth, and our jars will not go empty. And so I invite us today and in the days ahead to live courageously into our smallness, to argue and trust, to show up to places of power like that poor widow did, and be an irritant. Make the powerful uncomfortable. Because the world needs our little spirits. The immigrant, the trans person, the woman who has found herself pregnant and afraid, they need us to show up and say, I don't have all the answers. Actually, I'm not sure if I have any of the answers. But here, let's share this bread. Let's be realistic and expect a miracle, because God has promised that this earth is ours. So let's take one another's hands and walk together in it. Amen.